So, good afternoon. Today we're beginning Chapter 10, which focuses on one of the most practical and important aspects of work, compensation. We'll be examining the fundamental question of who gets what, why some workers are well rewarded for their work, while others earn barely enough to get by. Work serves many purposes beyond just earning money. Prestige, independence, authority, socializing with coworkers, and opportunities for personal growth all make jobs worth having. But let's be honest, if it weren't for the daily wage or monthly salary, many people would choose to do something else with their time. Money matters, and understanding how wages and salaries are determined is crucial for understanding the world of work. By the end of this lecture, you'll understand the factors that determine compensation, why income inequality has been growing, and how prestige factors into our perceptions of different occupation. Let's begin by examining how wages and salaries are determined. You might think that the size of workers' paychecks is directly tied to their contributions to the firms that employ them. To a considerable extent, this is true. Paycheck size often relates to one's contribution to the employing organization. However, from the outset, we need to recognize that variations in pay cannot be fully explained on the basis of individual skills and abilities alone. Education, race, gender, and age are also important determinants of wages and salaries. Then there's a puzzling fact within the ranks of workers with similar or identical characteristics. Some workers may get substantially more or less than others for no apparent reason. In the awarding of pay, as with most other aspects of life, quite a lot of variability cannot easily be explained through economic and sociological reasoning alone. Our inability to fully explain wage and salary differentials doesn't mean compensation is totally random, but it does mean we need to look beyond simple productivity measures to understand who gets what. The labor market has much in common with other kinds of markets, and understanding basic economics helps us understand wage determination. The workings of the labor market affect wages through supply and demand analysis. So let me give you an example to illustrate. A movie star might make more in a week than a sanitation worker does in a year of difficult, unpleasant work. At first glance, this seems strange. After all, what's more essential? Entertainment or safe waste disposal? We could go a long time without movies, but life would become miserable if drains backed up for prolonged periods. You might assume that high demand for sewage disposal could result in higher pay for anyone willing to do this unpleasant work. But this isn't the case for a simple reason. This work doesn't require uncommon talent or skills acquired through years of training. Anyone with sufficient physical strength and endurance can do this, which means there's a large potential supply of sanitation workers. When supply of labor expands, the prices paid will be low unless demand rises proportionally. Similarly, limited demand for a certain kind of work also drives down wages. Certain occupations only have small markets for their services. Think of professional lacrosse players, madrigal singers, or goat herders. This limited demand is reflected in low pay for the few employed in these lines. The market approach takes us only so far in explaining wage differentials. Here's something crucial to understand. Demand is actually a social construct, not just an objective economic reality. Some occupations and professions have been able to increase wages and salaries, not by becoming more productive, but by controlling the supply of labor. As we saw in Chapter 9, professionals have successfully convinced significant numbers of people that their services are essential. Academics have boosted job prospects by arguing that college education is essential for financial success. Medical care providers have benefited from the medicalization of many human conditions, everything from alcoholism to compulsive gambling. While trying to increase demand for their services, professionals also address the supply side. Holding down the number of practitioners is largely done by limiting access to credentialing institutions. Medical practice is restrictive to those who have attended accredited medical schools. Most tenured university positions go to PhD holders. This restriction of admission limits the supply of physicians and professors, reducing competition and protecting incomes of established members. A clear gap exists separating a small number of high earners from the rest of the working population. Let me break down the numbers for you using household quintiles, which is dividing all households into 5 groups of 20% each. In 2009, only 3.4% of the nation's income went to the bottom quintile of American households. The second quintile received 8.6%, the third 14.6%, and the fourth received 23.2%. Meanwhile, the top quintile took in 50.3% of the nation's income, more than half of all income earned. So, translating that into actual dollars, the mean household income for the bottom quintile was just $11,552, while the top quintile averaged $170,844. These gaps have grown with little interruption over the last 3 decades. In 2023, 3.5% of the nation's income went to the bottom quintile. The second quintile received 8.3, the third received 14.1, and the fourth received 22.6. Meanwhile, the top quintile took in 50.4%, with the top 5% taking 23%. Translating into dollars, the real median household income was $80,610 in 2023. In 1975, the top 20% accounted for 43.6% of income. So by 2023, the top quintile took in 50.4. During the same period, going to all but the top quintile declined or stayed the same. The gaps have persisted with little improvement over the last decade and a half, continuing to demonstrate significant income inequality in the United States. Compensation includes more than just wages and salaries. It also includes benefit packages, particularly health care and pensions. Let me address health care first, because it's a major component of total compensation. For many workers, health care is paid in part by employers. In part. But here's the critical point. Employers are not required to offer it. No other industrialized country relies so heavily on employers for health insurance provision. In virtually all economically developed nations, except the U.S., providing health care to everyone is a government responsibility, although employers usually assist in funding it. The situation has actually worsened in some areas since this textbook was written. In 2024, about 27 million Americans lack health insurance, down from 50 million, but still substantial. The U.S. now devotes 18% of GDP to healthcare, which is higher than the 17% mentioned here in your text, and this is projected to reach over 20% by 2033. Despite spending nearly twice as much per person on healthcare as other developed nations, the U.S. now ranks 49th in the world for life expectancy, even worse than the 24th place mentioned in your text. And while our infant mortality ranking has improved slightly to 33rd among OECD countries, we still have the highest infant mortality rate of any high-income nation. The paradox remains: highest spending, poorest outcomes among wealthy nations. You need to understand this isn't just abstract statistics. It represents real people facing financial ruin from medical bills, dying younger than their peers in other developed nations, and babies dying at rates that shouldn't exist in the world's wealthiest country. The pension system is another crucial component of total compensation. The Employment Retirement Income Security Act of 1974 set minimum standards for employer-based pension plans and established the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation as a backstop if employers cannot meet their obligations. Social Security payments provide a baseline for most retirees, but employer pensions significantly supplement this. However, there are several causes for concern about today's pensions. First, there's a widening gap in income, which means pension benefits are also unequally distributed. Unionized workers who tend to have higher wages than non-union workers are also more likely to have pension plans, so this benefit increases the income differential. Second, pensions are less likely to be provided to non-union workers, leaving large segments of the workforce without adequate retirement security. Third, and most important, there's fundamental question: can the system deliver as promised? Until recently, most pensions were defined benefit plans that promise specific amounts. Today, about 20% of private sector employees have defined benefit plans. All others have defined contribution plans that tie future benefits directly to monies contributed by employees. These are usually inferior in what they pay retirees. The ability to earn high incomes reflect more than individual ability. While unequal rewards can be effective resources for motivation, we need to ask some critical questions. First, how wide a gap is required to produce adequate motivation? So there's no easy answer. But consider this: the income gap was much more narrow from 1945 to 1975, yet worker productivity and the economy grew more rapidly than in the years that followed. In fact, from 1947 through 1974, incomes across all levels grew at roughly the same rate. Workers at the bottom, middle, and top all saw their pay rise together with productivity growth. But since the mid-70s, this relationship has been completely severed. From 1979 to 2024, productivity increased 80.9%, while typical worker compensation rose only 29.4%, meaning productivity grew 2.7 times faster than pay. A groundbreaking RAND study found that if income inequality had simply remained at the 1945-1975 levels, workers in the bottom 90% would have earned 2.5 trillion more in 2018 alone, over 47 trillion cumulatively from 1975 to 2018. So the question isn't whether inequality provides motivation. The post-war era proves that shared prosperity and strong economic growth can coexist. The real question is, at what point does extreme inequality actually harm economic performance? Many factors are involved in the widening income and wealth gap. Let me walk you through the major ones, starting with employment rates and economic structure. The overall rate of employment significantly affects wages, especially for workers at the bottom. High unemployment limits workers' options and decreases their bargaining power. When unemployment is low, worker shortage causes employers to increase wages. The unemployment rate stood at 4.2% in the fourth quarter of 2024, up from 3.8% a year earlier. This tighter labor market has actually benefited low wage workers in recent years. Between 2019 and 2024, they experienced historically fast real wage growth of 15.3%, though their pay still starts at such low levels that many struggle to sustain families. Another major factor is structural change in the U.S. economy. As we saw in Chapter 3, the service sector has overwhelmed the primary and secondary sectors. Services now provide jobs for approximately 81% of the workforce, even higher than just a few years ago. This has been positive for some. Physicians, bond traders, and attorneys earn handsome incomes. But the service sector also includes vast numbers of janitors, fast food workers, and retail clerks, whose wages often hover around poverty. The decline of well-paid manufacturing jobs had contributed significantly to income inequality. Manufacturing employment peaked in 1979 at 19.5 million workers, representing 25% of private sector employment. By the end of 2024, manufacturing employed only about 12.9 million workers, just 8% of total employment. Manufacturing doesn't exhibit as great an income spread, and workers in this section have historically enjoyed higher wages than service sector workers. The dramatic shift from manufacturing to services has fundamentally altered the wage structure of the American economy, with fewer middle-income manufacturing jobs available and more workers competing for high-paying professional service jobs or low-wage service. Through much of the 20th century, unions fought for higher wages and better working conditions. At the beginning of the 21st century, however, their prominence has fallen dramatically. Union membership reached a high of about 20.1% of employees in 1983, when comparable data became first available. Historical estimates show higher rates, around 37% in the 1940s and 50s. By 2024, only 9.9% of all workers belong to unions, a record low and a dramatic decline. What is particularly striking is the difference between public and private sectors. 32.2% of government workers belong to unions in 2024 versus 5.9% in the private industry, also a record low for the private sector. Although the private sector employs far more workers than the public sector, the number of unionized workers in both sectors is now almost identical. 7 million in government and 7.2 million in private industry. Union membership also varies considerably by industry. Industries with the highest unionization rates in 2024 include utilities at 18.7%, transportation and warehousing at 15.8%, and educational services at 13.2%. Construction and extraction occupations had a 15.4% union membership rate. In manufacturing, once a union bastion, union membership has declined by 0.8 percentage points and 167,000 members between 2019 and 2024. At the bottom are finance at 0.8%, insurance at 1.2%, professional and technical services at 1.2%, and agriculture related industries at 1.4%. Despite this decline in membership rates, union members had median weekly earnings of $1,337 in 2024, while non-union members had median weekly earnings of $1,138, a difference of $200 per week or $10,000 annually. The power of unions, along with their strike abilities, should make them effective bargaining units. And indeed, when background factors like industry, occupation, region, education, and experience are comparable, workers who belong to unions earn wages that are 14.1% higher than unaffiliated workers. Unionized workers also receive 15 to 25% more in benefits like health insurance. While unionized workers receive higher wages than non-union workers, their presence has boosted wages for non-unionized workers indirectly through what's called the threat effect. This causes employers to set wages, salaries, and benefits at levels comparable to union enterprises to forestall unionization. This has been particularly notable in the automobile industry, where Japanese, German, and Korean firms set up operations in the American South, a region where unions have historically been weak. Despite UAW organizing efforts, it's remained that way largely because wages and benefits have stayed closely tied to those received by union members in other parts of the country. The union wage premium is not distributed equally, though. For African Americans and Hispanics, it is 18.3% and 21.9%, whereas it is only 12.4% for whites. Women workers get the least relative benefit at 10.7%. Union non-union wage differentials are especially pronounced for low-skilled workers, and unions are good at protecting the most vulnerable workers' wages. Technological change is one of the leading culprits when income inequalities are examined. It's a far reaching force that affects virtually every industry and occupation. Here's an important point that often gets misunderstood. Labor saving technology does not necessarily increase overall unemployment. New technology may increase unemployment and lower wages in certain sectors and for certain occupations, but they do not typically cause widespread permanent joblessness across the entire economy. What technological change does do is create winners and losers. Some workers benefit tremendously from new tech that makes them more productive or create new opportunities. Others find their skills becoming obsolete or their jobs automated away. The question isn't whether technology destroys jobs in the aggregate, but rather how it redistributes opportunities and income across different groups of workers. Job loss does not necessarily increase unemployment in the aggregate. This is a crucial distinction to understand. One industry may lose jobs, while another gains them. However, and this is important, the loss of jobs is not the same as the loss of work. So let me explain what I mean. When we talk about jobs, we're referring to specific positions in specific industries. When we talk about work, we're referring to productive activity more broadly. So jobs can disappear, but the work that needs doing in society doesn't necessarily disappear with them. It may just shift to different forms or different locations. So this distinction matters because it helps us understand why technological unemployment isn't as catastrophic as it might first appear, even though it can be devastating for individuals and communities whose particular jobs disappear. Technological change might give rise to entirely new industries that didn't exist previously. Think about how the internet created millions of jobs that weren't even conceivable 40 years ago. Web designers, social media managers, app developers, cybersecurity specialists. Technological change also has indirect effects on employment opportunities through a mechanism economists have long recognized. Labor saving technology reduces production costs, which means consumers get cheaper goods. When people spend less on some goods, they have surplus income that's likely to be spent on other goods and services, providing jobs to the producers of those other items. For example, when agriculture technology reduced the number of farmers needed to feed the nation, food prices dropped. This freed up consumer income that could be spent on manufactured goods and services, creating jobs in those sectors. The same process continues today with each wave of technological change. The story of technological change is not uniformly happy. While there may not be aggregate unemployment from technology, there are serious consequences for individuals, industries, and regions. Workers who lose jobs to automation often simply can't move into new jobs being created. The steel worker whose job is automated can't easily become a computer programmer. The regions that depended on old industries suffer, even when new jobs are created elsewhere. Appalachian coal mining communities do not benefit when tech jobs are created in Silicon Valley. Increased income through technological change is likely to be distributed unevenly. Those with skills that complement new tech see their incomes rise. Those whose skills are made obsolete see their incomes stagnate or fall. This contributes significantly to the widening income inequality we have been discussing. Computers are a major source of economic change in recent decades, and their use benefits some workers while disadvantaging others. So let's look at their impact on wage inequalities. There is a positive association between wages and frequency of computer usage, both within industries and across them. Workers who use computers extensively tend to earn more than those who don't. Computers may also be implicated in the link between wages and education. Computer use at work is highly correlated with workers' educational attainment, which in turn determines income. However, computers have not been proven to be a major direct source of inequality. The relationship is much more complex than simply computer skills equals higher pay. We need to look deeper at what the computers can and cannot do to understand their real impact on wage inequality. The significance of computers may have more to do with what they cannot do than what they can do. Researchers have emphasized this point effectively. Computers are good for routine tasks, things that can be broken down into step by step procedures and algorithms. But humans are still needed for addressing complex problems that cannot be solved through set procedures. Equally important, computers are poor substitutes for skilled workers when it comes to complex communication, the ability to organize, interpret, and convey information in ways that are most useful and relevant to recipients. Looking at the flip side, widespread computer diffusion has diminished the need for workers capable of only routine tasks. Occupation and jobs requiring little more than routine manual or simple cognitive tasks have grown at slower rates than ones requiring higher order cognitive and communication skills. Workers in routine jobs have little leverage regarding wages, salaries, and benefits, while employees with complex problem solving and communication skills are in advantageous bargaining positions. Globalization is one of the most important causes of income disparities, according to many observers. Specifically, the issue centers on offshoring, the relocation of productive activities to low wage countries overseas. Offshoring is most prominent in manufacturing, but growing numbers of service industry jobs have moved abroad. Radiologists in India interpret CT scans. Accountants in the Philippines audit American firm accounts. Engineers in China design microchip circuits, and engineers in Poland produce plans for massive industrial complexes. Critics charge that globalization is overwhelmingly negative for domestic labor. They argue that sending work abroad abroad has devastating effects on American workers, causing job loss and driving down wages even for those who keep their jobs. For critics of globalization, the logic seems straightforward and compelling. Poorer countries have much larger labor pools than the U.S. They can manufacture goods and provide services more cheaply because labor costs are lowered. Even without direct job loss, competition from foreign workers drives down domestic wages. The fear is that American workers simply cannot compete with workers in countries where labor is cheap and environmental or safety regulations are minimal. This creates a, quote, race to the bottom, where American wages must fall to compete or jobs must be shipped overseas to take advantage of lower costs abroad. These concerns are particularly acute for manufacturing workers who have watched factories close and jobs disappear to Mexico, China, and other countries over recent decades. On the positive side, the effects of globalization may not be as severe as critics claim. First, the number of good jobs lost to offshoring has not been as large as often assumed. Job losses caused by offshore competition have been well publicized, but the number of jobs relocated abroad has been much smaller than the number of new jobs being added to the economy as a whole. Widespread unemployment from globalization is unlikely because tens of millions of jobs cannot be offshored. Jobs in retail trade, healthcare, education, and law enforcement are difficult or impossible to relocate abroad. Other work is more easily transferred, but relocation will likely be limited by communication difficulties, deficiencies of foreign workers, loss of tacit knowledge acquired by homegrown employees, and negative publicity attending sending jobs abroad. At the most general level, globalization's effects are similar to technological change. It creates winners and losers, but it doesn't necessarily reduce total unemployment. Immigration is not a new phenomenon, nor is concern about its effects a recent development. The presumed connection between immigration and low wages was an article of faith for early 20th century union organizers, who were among the chief opponents of unchecked immigration. In the short term, it's reasonable to expect that an increase in worker supply will drive down wages. However, recent comprehensive research shows the opposite has occurred. A major 2024 study analyzing immigration from 2000 to 2019 found that immigration had a positive and significant effect between 1.7% to 2.6% on wages of less educated native workers, with no significant wage effect on college educated natives. The study also found positive employment rates effects for most native workers, even with even simulations for the 2019-22 period, suggesting small positive effects on wages. More recent research examining immigration flows from 2000 to 2022 found that immigration raised the average U.S. born worker's wage by 0.8% over more than 2 decades, with workers holding a high school diploma or less education seeing slightly larger increases in the range of 2.8 to 3.2. The estimated impact for college educated workers was slightly negative, but translated into less than 4 cents per hour over more than 2 decades. A comprehensive review by economist Giovanni Perry of more than 270 estimates from 27 published studies found that on average, effect of immigration on native born wages is essentially zero, with two-thirds of these studies clustered around zero, finding small positive or small negative effects. The evidence suggests that immigration leads to more innovation, a better educated workforce, greater occupational specialization, better matching of skills with jobs, and higher overall economic productivity. However, not all workers experience these benefits equally. Previous research has shown that wage effects of larger immigration flows were more negative for immigrant workers who already resided in the U.S., as newly arriving immigrants are more likely to possess skills similar to those of previous immigrant arrivals. Additionally, competition from new immigrants has mostly affected earlier immigrants who experienced significant reduction in wages from the surge of immigration. First, immigrants are a wide and diverse group. Many are uneducated, but others are highly educated with university and postgraduate degrees, qualifying them for high level jobs in medicine, education, management science, and engineering. Second, those highly educated immigrants have found enterprises that promote job growth. Many successful tech companies were started by immigrants or have immigrant co founders. These companies create jobs for both immigrants and native born workers. The education picture for immigrants has become more complex and nuanced in recent years. In 2016, about 27% of the foreign born population had less than a high school or equivalent degree by age 25, compared with 8% of native born, and nearly 1 in 6, 16% of the foreign born, had less than a ninth grade education by age 25, compared with 2% of the native born. However, recent data shows both improvements and concerning new trends. In 2022, among immigrants who arrived since 2010, 45.2% had a bachelor's degree or higher, compared with 38% of U.S. natives and 32.8% of earlier immigrants who arrived in the 90s. A greater share of U.S. immigrants, 15.2%, than U.S. natives, 14%, held advanced degrees such as master's degrees, professional degrees, or doctorates in 2022. Yet more recent data reveals a concerning trend. By 2024, 46% of new adult immigrants had no education beyond high school, the first time in more than a decade that new adult immigrants with no education beyond high school outnumbered those with a bachelor's degree. This compares to 35% of U.S. born adults with no education beyond high school, whereas in 2018 the rates roughly matched. This recent decline reflects the surge in immigration from Latin America, where educational attainment tends to be lower. Workers lacking educational credentials face bleak prospects regardless of immigration status. In 2024, employed adult new immigrants with at least a bachelor's degree had a median earning of $46,327 compared to $26,975 for those with no education beyond high school. But for many immigrant workers, even poorly paying jobs in the U.S. represent significant improvements over what they could find in their native countries. Importantly, the second generation children of immigrants showed high educational achievement. In 2016, 38% had attained a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 32% of the first generation and 33% of the third and higher generation, suggesting that educational attainment improves significantly across generation. Several lingering questions remain about immigrants' impact on wages and employment. Why are immigrant workers attractive to employers? Is it just lower wages, or are there other factors like work ethic, flexibility, or willingness to do jobs native-born workers refuse to do or avoid? What do immigrant workers actually get paid? Are they receiving market-level wages, or are they being exploited, particularly if they lack legal status? The threat of deportation from undocumented workers produces a docility that can be easily exploited by unscrupulous employers. Who are the victims of immigration? As we've seen, the chief victims appear to be low-skilled U.S. born workers whose already low wages have been further diminished by competition with unskilled immigrants. High-skilled workers have been largely ineffective or even benefited. Finally, is immigration beneficial or detrimental overall? The answer appears to be beneficial in the aggregate, but with significant negative effects on particular groups that deserve attention and policy responses. Some occupations offer prestige in addition to wages or salaries. This is an important component of what workers receive for their labor, even though it cannot be deposited into a bank account. Prestige should be distinguished from status. Status simply means the position of a person or group in society. Widower, Rotarian, sister-in-law are all examples of status without necessarily implying hierarchy. Prestige, by contrast, denotes a place in a hierarchical order. High prestige implies respect, admiration, and the ability to elicit some measure of deference. Prestige is particularly important in modern society that lacks well-defined social divisions like religiously sanctioned caste or distinct lines separating nobles and commoners. When two people meet for the first time, the first question likely will be, "What do you do?" Understood to mean, "What kind of work do you do?" Our occupations are central to our identities. Numerous surveys have been conducted over the years to assess the relative privilege of different occupations. These surveys report remarkable stability over time in some respects, though recent research reveals important shifts. Occupational prestige rankings from the 1960s look very similar to those from subsequent decades, with results from 1964 and 1989 surveys proving virtually identical despite using different methodological approaches. Country to country comparisons remain similar. Research comparing the U.S. with 59 other societies yielded an average intercorrelation of 0.837, meaning about 70% of the variation in occupational prestige is consistent across nations. Doctors rank high and low-skilled service workers rank low in virtually every society where such surveys have been conducted. This suggests that certain factors determining occupational prestige are nearly universal. In recent comprehensive research collecting prestige ratings for 1,029 specific occupations, researchers found that occupations with high prestige required skills traditionally emphasized in liberal arts education, such as critical thinking and reading comprehension. Race, class, ethnicity, and gender of respondents have little effect on rankings. Whether you're rich or poor, black or white, male or female, you're likely to rank doctors above janitors and lawyers above parking attendants. This consensus about occupational prestige remains striking. However, recent data shows some significant changes. From 1977 to the early 2000s, percentage of Americans viewing teaching as having considerable or very great prestige rose dramatically from 29% to 54% by 2001. Similarly, firefighters saw their prestige ratings rise significantly, increasing 15 points from 48 to 63% between the early 2000s and 2006. Yet troubling declines have emerged for some professions. Teaching profession prestige has dropped sharply since 2010, falling from 79% viewing it as having considerable or great prestige in 1998 to just 58% in 22. The percentage of parents who would like their child to become a teacher dropped from over 65% in the 90s to only 37% in 2022. Remarkably, research has documented growing prestige of some low-status occupational titles, which is inconsistent with socioeconomic trends observed in the workforce, such as growing inequality in earnings, the decline of unionized blue-collar employment, and the absence of systematic skill upgrading for blue-collar workers. This suggests that prestige and pay, while related, are not perfectly correlated, a pattern that warrants further study. Several factors govern the relative prestige of occupations. The first and most obvious is wages and salaries attached to occupation. Generally, high paying occupations enjoy high prestige. But this relationship isn't perfect. Consider the relative prestige of drug dealers and clergy. Drug dealers may make substantial money, but they do not enjoy prestige, at least outside their criminal circles. Ministers, priests, and rabbis earn modest incomes but enjoy high occupational prestige. This brings us to the second major factor: educational preparation. Occupations requiring extensive education generally enjoy higher prestige. As we saw in Chapter 9, the ratcheting up of educational requirements may have as much to do with elevating occupational prestige as with improving practitioner performance. The more years of schooling required, the higher the prestige tends to be. Other governing factors include perceived importance of work. A surgeon can save someone's life. An attorney can save a client from prison. Members of the clergy have special relationships with God and the spiritual world, giving them unique powers and responsibility in believers' eyes. The clients served also affect prestige. Selling insurance and working as a stockbroker have many similarities, yet stockbrokers enjoy higher prestige, largely because they serve significantly more affluent clientele. Note too the different perceptions of elementary school teachers versus college professors. Higher intellectual levels may be expected of professors, but no less important is they teach adults rather than children. Finally, the work environment matters tremendously. White collar work versus blue collar work. This distinction carries significant prestige implications. Much white collar work doesn't differ fundamentally from blue collar work in skill, responsibilities, or pay, but white collar workers go about tasks in air conditioned offices rather than factories where environments can be noisy, smelly, and dirty. A clean hands occupation is almost always more prestigious than equivalent work that leaves practitioners needing long showers at day's end. Today, we've explored the complex factors that determine who gets what in our economy. We've seen that while market forces of supply and demand play important roles, wage and salary determination involves much more, including education, unionization, technological change, globalization, and immigration. We've examined the disturbing trend of widening income inequality, where the top 20% of households now receive more than half of all income. We've looked at how other benefits like healthcare and pensions add to compensation packages, though access is highly unequal. We've also explored occupational prestige and just how it's determined by factors beyond wages, including education, perceived importance, clientele served, and work environment. As you think about your future careers, consider not just the salary you might earn, but the total compensation package, job security, and the prestige associated with different occupations. Understanding these factors will help you make more informed career decisions. Next time, we'll take a closer look at life on the job itself, examining the circumstances that can make work a generally pleasurable experience. We'll explore job satisfaction, workplace condition, and what makes some jobs more rewarding than others beyond just the paycheck.